Welcome to this explainer of the source material for The Broken Grammar of Justice. Today we're diving into a genuinely dark atmospheric fable. We're talking about the absolute collapse of structural law. This isn't your standard academic breakdown, no. We are plunging straight into a brooding, almost mythological narrative where a high priest discovers a truly horrifying truth at the very center of his faith. We're going to watch the very foundations of meaning just completely unravel. Think about this quote for a second. Every law I enforced was a temporary freeze imposed on a language that was never finished. Wow. We are immediately dropping into the mind of a high priest right in the middle of a sudden, terrifying psychological collapse. In real time, he is realizing that his entire life's work, the laws he guarded, the sequences he memorized, the order he violently enforced, was all a complete fraud. It's a profound crisis, not just of faith, but literally of reality itself. 1. Expectation of order. 2. Discovery of the wound. 3. Embrace of the rupture. To really grasp this psychological collapse, we're going to trace his journey using a Fichtean dialectic. We start with his rigid thesis of law, plunge downward into the chaotic antithesis of reality's wound, and finally land at a very dark synthesis. It's essentially a psychological roadmap of a mind breaking into pieces and then remaking itself. Picture this. The high priest traces his descent through 3 distinct underground landings. On the way down, he has to push past these tangled roots of living elderwood. For those newer to the lore, elderwood isn't just a plant. It's a sentient, ancient timber that seems to actively reject his presence. Now he's kneeling in the octagonal dark of a lower sanctuary, his palms pressed to an empty depression that simply refuses to answer. The formal invocation just dies in his throat. His sacred, memorized sequences slip away, replaced by desperate, broken prayers. This is where the loss of his identity truly begins, completely erased by a silence that is older than any temple. You see, he went down into the sanctuary with a very clear expectation. He wanted an unbroken grammar, a perfect legal and spiritual language that would restore order to the chaotic city above. But the reality? Horrifyingly different. Instead of a source of absolute order, the sanctuary dropped him right into the place where meaning itself first split. His lifelong expectation of divine structure just turns to ash in an instant. This brings us to a massive concept, the original failure. It's defined as the primordial moment where meaning split and refused to heal. Basically, the universe's total grammar was never actually completed by its creator. And because of this original failure, every single law, every rule, every societal structure we cling to, it's nothing more than a temporary, fragile patch over a cosmic wound that predates speech itself. Mind-blowing, right? And the atmosphere down there reflects this cosmic failure perfectly. There's a massive mosaic dragon surrounding the priest, flexing its scales with a sound like pages that will never ever finish turning. Now, these scales are forged from dragon glass. If you aren't familiar, dragon glass holds some wild magical properties. It actually reflects cosmic remnants and timelines that failed to materialize. The air down there is heavy with the twin scents of dead stars and newborn galaxies, tying this primordial beast directly to the terrifying reality of a failed, uncontainable order. Faced with all this cosmic void, something inside the priest's chest completely inverts. He says, "I spent 40 years polishing the lies that kept this city readable." So, the obedient servant of measure and law doesn't just break down into despair. No, he breaks into a bitter, rising denunciation. The chaos happening in the city above isn't an assault on his faith anymore. It's the long overdue exposure of a lie he spent his entire lifetime guarding. To really grasp the sheer weight of this collapse, the priest reflects on 5 profound parables. We have the breathing scale, the runaway script, the shattered glass, the dissolving market, and the retreating horizon. Each of these acts as a dark case study, the antithesis in our dialectic, proving that the mechanics of measurement and law will inevitably devour themselves. Let's look at the first parable. A keeper of weights builds a temple around a single perfect scale that never tips, teaching his people that justice is absolute stillness. But one night, the scale actually begins to breathe with a pulse older than metal. When the keeper tries to violently force it back to stillness, the scale opens like a mouth and literally swallows his hands. The takeaway? Justice absolutely cannot be frozen. The only true measure is one that devours the measurer who tries to control it. Moving to the second parable, we hit on the tragedy of forced permanence. A scribe copies the exact same law onto fresh parchment every single morning, convinced that repetition guarantees stability. But on the 1,000th morning, the letters literally crawl off the page. They start rearranging themselves into questions the scribe was never trained to ask, turning the scriptorium floor itself into one giant, unfinished sentence. The fabric of reality just refuses to accept a final period. The illusion of trapped divinity proves just as fatal in our third parable, and it perfectly mirrors the high priest's own breaking prayers down in the dark. So a priest seals a dragon's last breath in a glass vessel, treating it as the voice of final order. When the glass starts sweating luminous cracks that spell out contradictory futures, the priest panics and smashes it to stop the heresy. But the breath doesn't escape, it enters him. From that day on, every single prayer he utters tragically splits into conflicting demands, the voice of stillness on one side and the voice of endless revision on the other. The fourth parable takes us into the absolute darkest corners of commerce. A merchant who makes a living selling invisible goods decides to sell the absence of the market itself. The transaction actually completes, but in doing so, the stalls, the scales, and the very ground dissolve into a single expanding zero. The merchant achieves the purest, most destructive form of commerce imaginable, exchanging absolutely everything for an endless, gaping void. And the final parable strikes at the very boundary of reality itself. A judge sentences the horizon to remain fixed, ensuring the world is never larger than the law allows. For a whole century, it obeys. But then, it simply steps backward into an unmapped drop. The judge actually follows it, gavel raised, still shouting out boundaries that no longer exist, only to realize the horizon was never a solid line. It was an open wound where every map ends. These are not aberrations. They are the long overdue correction. These cascading failures perfectly mirror the chaos engulfing the priest's own city. Thieves walking free, judges sentencing the sky. He realizes the breakdown of societal order isn't a glitch. It's simply the return of truth, tearing violently through the artificial man-made structures of law. This brings him to his final dark synthesis, the rupture. We define the rupture as the uncontainable surplus of meaning, that second voice of chaotic becoming that the strictness of law always desperately tried to silence. The high priest realizes that this rupture is actually the natural state of existence. The primordial dragon failed to close reality into a neat little text, and trying to force it closed, well, that is the true illusion. So, the high priest makes his final choice, completely abandoning his old identity as a restorer of order. Surrounded by ancient ceremonial masks, he looks at their reflections in the dark glass, a powerful symbol of shedding his orthodox identity once and for all. He declares he's going to let the proliferating scroll and the twin spirits finish their chaotic work. And as he embraces this chaos, the temple itself undergoes its final transformation, the ancient architecture literally warping and twisting to match this newly ruptured grammar. He rises from the dark as the very first priest of the rupture. Which leaves us with an incredibly provocative question to ponder. Is the only honest sanctuary the one that refuses to heal? It's an unsettling thought, right? Consider the possibility that the absolute order we all crave is merely a comfortable lie, just a temporary patch over a beautifully chaotic universe.